We'll see about that, motherfucker. I told you before, you can't kill me.
Time and time again, horror, especially B-horror, seems to be the king of the VHS collecting scene for numerous reasons. But for as many interesting reasons it is sought after and collected, it also is the most mysterious and undocumented genre of almost any collectible category. These are the biggest mysteries of the VHS horror world. Before I begin, this is obviously not going to be every single mystery. There are so many, it's not even funny. We're going to start with a rather well-known classic, which is Tales from the Quadead Zone. Tales from the Quadead Zone is a low-budget anthology series that was shot on video and created by Chester and Turner, who also made the other holy grail, Black Devil Doll from Hell. Despite its low budget and also low production, it is considered one of the rarest and most desired horror tapes in the entire horror collecting scene. Typically, when you see a copy of Tales from the Quadead Zone, it's going to be this red slipcase variant with the skull on front. However, there exists another version, which is this weird, bizarre clamshell with a blue zombie hand. Many have questioned the authenticity of this version, as you gotta keep in mind, this tape had a little under 100 made, so the fact that there's variants with such a extremely low number is strange at the least. However, there are two things that back up this copy being authentic. One, many of the pictures and videos of this tape come from well-established collections, and I'm talking the upper echelon of horror collecting. On top of that, Massacre Video, which is a distribution company that has re-released multiple horror films, has used this very cover on its Massacre Video clamshell. So there's a lot of signs that point to it being authentic, and it's also not surprising that something like this would actually exist, as many of these directors would send out a kind of promo copy to rental stores back in the day. So even for a rare movie, it's not surprising that there is a rare variant like this. However, as to which one's more expensive, it's really hard to say. I think they're relatively even. You should be grateful if you have any version of Tales from the Quadead Zone. Next up is Bionaut. Now, this is a little bit confusing, but I can explain it. In 1991, a movie called Beasties was released and had a extremely low production amount. Around a little under 200 of these were made and was pulled due to really poor sales. One thing that really didn't help was its abysmal marketing, which was trying to kind of copy the gremlins in the cover, despite the characters that actually look like this not really being in the film, and the term beasties just not even being used at all in the film. This was a last-minute marketing attempt to scrape as many sales as possible, and it was a gimmick that ultimately failed. Despite this, it is still considered a holy grail in the VHS collecting scene. However, it doesn't command nowhere near as close of a price as something like Tales from the Quadead Zone. But there is an interesting, and I mean very interesting, caveat to this specific tape. Beastie's runtime is about 83 minutes. However, there once existed a VHS work print of this film which contained 20 extra minutes of deleted footage. This work print was allegedly destroyed many years ago. However, what very few people know is there is another variant of this film that is much more rare than even the less than 200 counterpart. This was the more accurately marketed Bionaut. There was reason to believe that this rare variant does in fact contain the additional 20 minutes of missing footage. However, it was very difficult to verify this, as you can't even find a picture online of this tape. That is until I stumbled across this Instagram post, which showed not only a picture of it, but the runtime. And the runtime was, as a matter of fact, 107 minutes, which is almost more than 20 minutes, which was accurately depicted from the sources and claims, meaning this copy truly does have the additional 20 minutes of deleted footage from the long lost work print. Thankfully, you can find this extended version online with little to no issue, and you don't have to hunt down some extremely rare copy. Next up is a legendary tale of Cards of Death. Cards of Death was another shot on video horror movie about police trying to investigate a game of death where you have to gamble with your life or other people's lives. This tape was specifically famous for being one of the earliest cases of lost media, almost as OG, if not more OG, than the wacky adventures of Ronald McDonald. This tape was famously difficult to get your hands on and still is one of, if not the most difficult horror tape to acquire, specifically because it was only known to have an extremely low-run, limited Japanese release. However, someone was eventually able to get their hands on a copy and redistribute re-releases of this film, and it was also eventually uploaded online. However, finding an online version is a little tricky, but not impossible. But what's really interesting is that the collector VHS Shitfest revealed an insane mystery. This mystery being an American copy of Cards of Death. Sadly, there's not much more I can say about this long lost rare version of Cards of Death, as there's quite literally nothing online. No documentation, no photos, nothing. However, it is really hard to fake something like this, and this is coming from an established collector, VHS Shitfest, so this is undoubtedly a legit copy. Apparently, even the people who made the re-release for the film weren't even aware of this long lost American version. Again, we have a copy, but there's just almost nothing online or documentation on this, and the same can be said about a lot of horror movies in this genre. Hopefully one day more light will shed on the mystery of this tape and others in the future. But for now, let's talk about some other insane mysteries that we do know about. Now we're going to talk about a UK classic called Beast in Heat. Now, if you want to talk about real VHS rabbit holes, this is one of the craziest ones I know personally. Before I move on with this one, I want to make a huge disclaimer. That being that this was extremely difficult to find accurate and credible information on, and I had a lot of struggle and difficulties researching this particular tape, mainly because it's not as well known as you think, and you have to do some pretty serious digging and understanding of the history of this particular item, which isn't as accessible to find as you think. Also, huge sensitivity warning, this is definitely the most controversial one on this entire list by a landslide. And to fully explain it, we have to kind of get legal with it. But without getting too legal, Beast in Heat was one of the many banned B-horror / exploitation films categorized under the label Video Nasties. Video Nasties was a title given to a specific list of films which were banned and not allowed to be distributed throughout the UK. A good chunk of these Video Nasty films are rather famous films like Faces of Death, Cannibal Holocaust, and Snuff, just to name a couple. However, one of the most infamous ones from this list is Beast in Heat for a couple reasons. If you want a quick synopsis of the story, an SS biologist officer creates a half-man, half-beast who attacks and terrifies the women he encounters. Definitely a family classic and a great first movie to watch with your date. Now, this is where things start to get really bizarre, so please hold on tight with me. If you look here, this is, to my knowledge, the only original officially released version of Beast in Heat, and anything outside of the UK was released years, if almost decades after the original UK releases, like in America and Korea. But this version is the video pleasure variant. It's believed to be a Dutch/Northern European version, and like I said before, is the only known official release. But strangely, it doesn't appear to be the most desired version of this film. That honor, quote unquote, allegedly goes to the JVI version. But here's where things get really strange and really complicated. From what I can gather, JVI, or otherwise known as Jobbed Video International, information's pretty scarce on this one. It was a distributing company that was notorious for making a bunch of unofficial / bootlegs of films. The Beast in Heat JVI specifically had an interesting story to it if you're considering this true mythological version. That being that JVI copies are a same core print of the film, meaning the film was not touched in any shape or form, as the majority of the bootlegs were edited in some shape or form. This actually led to a rumor a lot of sellers falsely claimed, which was that their version had lost scenes on it, but this is just confusing the same core print situation. As you can tell, there is a lot of problems with these claims. Problem one with this is this movie in particular is notoriously pirated and bootlegged up the wazoo. So yeah, think of a bootleg of a bootleg, basically. And this bootleg of bootleg is a much more common scenario than an original bootleg. So yeah, it's already getting confusing and ridiculous in my opinion. Problem two is that let's say you do have an original copy on your left hand and a alleged boot on your right, and both assuming JVI. The differences between the two are almost identical. You have to have an extremely sharp eagle eye to spot the difference between an original bootleg JVI and a bootleg of a bootleg. So yeah, we're talking like the shell of the VHS can make or break the difference for authenticating an original. And if it's at the point where you literally have to open it to authenticate whether it's real or not, it starts to get a little silly in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. It's true that a lot of very rare collectibles, like in the toy scene with rocket firing Boba Fett or an Ultimatosaurus, do get copied and duped quite often. However, there's always very noticeable differences between a true version and a fake version, which with the right awareness and attention you can eventually spot without being the most skilled toy collector. But when it comes to comparing a real JVI to a fake JVI, it is very difficult, if not way more difficult, almost to the point where I'd argue it might not even be worth trying to go for an original JVI. That being said, there are still people who have gambled thousands of dollars hoping that they have one of these true bootleg JVIs. However, even when making a massive purchase like this, people aren't even fully confident that they have a 100% original one. Now listen, I genuinely do believe that there are real JVI copies with this special unedited footage. However, verifying these seems to just be way too difficult to even consider going all in on something, especially considering these allegedly go for thousands of dollars. One thing I will say against JVI Beast and Heat tapes is that this particular tape has constantly been seen as one of the most expensive UK tapes across multiple blog posts and forums from way back in the day. So there is a speculation that there is a little bit of overhype to this, but because of its like very rich and interesting history, you can't really compare it to something like Black Diamond VHS tapes, which are blatantly a scam. Now, I'm sure someone can explain why this alleged version is much more significant than an original copy, but it's one of the only times in collecting I've ever heard of a bootleg going for more than an original. It just seems like ass backwards, but what the hell do I know? If you think you can give a better and clear explanation of the whole rabbit hole of the JVI Beast and Heat, please let us know in the comments. I think it would be very insightful and very interesting for anyone one to read who is interested on it. That about wraps it up for this video, but it doesn't wrap up the ever-going mysteries of the horror VHS realm, as there is one movie in particular that has such a rich, crazy story that it deserves its own video. Stay tuned.